Okay, we are rolling. Anybody want to pray us in this morning?
Got it.
Okay, great.
Lord, I thank you so much for this day, and I thank you for this week of study. Lord, I pray that you would continue to reveal yourself this morning, and I pray that you would bless our time together. In Jesus' name, amen.
Hey, sorry, okay. Big on. Okay, today we are in Romans 11, verses 11 through 12, and it says this. So I ask, did they stumble in order that they might fall? By no means. Rather, through their trespass, salvation has come to the Gentiles, so as to make Israel jealous. Now, if their trespass means riches for the world, and their failure means riches for Gentiles, how much more will the full inclusion mean? What do we notice on first reading? Getting it figured out, Miss Gail?
I got it figured out.
Beautiful.
Sorry about that.
You're good. Anybody find anything on first reading? No observations?
The only thing I'm thinking of is like in when Joseph says, "You meant this for harm, but God meant it for good." I kind of see that here. Like they didn't just stumble just so that they can be destroyed. Like
Mm-hmm.
there's a deeper purpose that's happening that's working through this.
Mm-hmm.
What I notice.
Yeah.
I think it's definitely a reminder that the Jews are God's chosen people. He's not
Mm-hmm.
just gonna. It's like, okay, you turned your back on Jesus, my
Mm-hmm.
son. Go away.
Uh-huh.
He's still wooing them,
Mm-hmm.
so to speak.
Mm-hmm. Yes, we find here another one of our by no means statements, right? One of 10 in the book of Romans, 14 in the Bible. And Paul's writing, anyways. Um, so, what is he by no meansing? What is he absolutely nodding? So, I ask, did they stumble in order that they might fall? By no means. So, yeah, like what Hillary was talking about, was the purpose of their stumbling with Jesus. They're ignoring, like, what is he talking about when he's saying this?
He's
How
saying
did
it
this,
wasn't just so that they would stumble, there was a bigger picture.
right, but how did they stumble?
Not seeing the Messiah, they
Right,
missed it.
right. Yeah. Yeah, they put him on the cross instead of accepting him. So, did they stumble over Jesus just so God could punish them? No, absolutely not. That's not what he's doing. And so this is an interesting shift in what we've been talking about, right? Because we've been talking about how God has his hand on everything, right? And he's moving everything for a purpose. And we've seen that that's true with salvation, right? That he is deciding with salvation, and that can sit funky. And he's like, but it's not just so he can punish people. That's not why. He's got other things in the works. Because what happens as a result of Israel stumbling, of them missing Jesus?
Salvation.
For who?
No reflex.
Huh?
Belinda and I talked at the same time. I said, Jinx, no reflex.
Yeah.
Sorry. Out of the 80s.
What did you say, Miss Gail?
I said to the Gentiles,
Yes.
to the rest of the world, actually.
Yeah, because God been working within his chosen people, right? And when they miss Jesus, he says, this gospel's for all people, which had been the promise since Abraham, right? And so them missing Jesus fulfills this opportunity for the rest of the world to have access to the gospel. For him to send Paul out and go, your ministry is to the Gentiles. Rather, through their trespass. Oh, goodness. Through their trespass, salvation has come to the Gentiles so as to make Israel jealous. What do you think he's saying there?
I mean, is he alluding to like they've they've always seen themselves as a particularly special people and that God chose them. And yet he's pointing out, like, actually, you did reject me. You don't think you did, but you did. And so I'll go to the people who will be open. And then so maybe their response would be like, no, wait a minute. Like, he's ours. Wait, stop. That's our God. Can't have him.
Yeah. Yeah, the word that's used here for jealous is parazelu, which is literally means to provoke to jealousy. And so it is like Kev's like, fine then, I'll go over here, looking over his shoulder, waiting for them to beg him to come back. But it's different than if a person does that, because God knows that they will. Does that make sense? So, when a person is playing like that, it's like, okay, they may not respond the way you want them to. Like, you may not be that great, But he's like, no, they will chase after me when I step back. I think we sometimes struggle with this idea of God being a jealous God that would then provoke Israel's jealousy, like jealous for them. So he provokes them to jealousy for him. Because when people do jealousy, we're wrong, right? But why is it different? Why is it good for God to be a jealous God that's intentionally provoking Israel to jealousy so that they might know him?
Because he's the greatest good.
Yeah.
It's okay for him to want us to want the greatest good.
Yes.
But when we do it, we're not the greatest good. So,
yes. We have skewed understanding of how great we are when we're jealous. He has accurate understanding of how great he is when he is jealous. And I do think it's funny that God knows man in this way. That they're like, we're God's chosen people, da-da-da-da-da. Oh, salvation's going to the Gentiles. Okay, well, maybe I do want it. Maybe I do. Maybe I do want to know more about that. And
sounds like toddlers.
yeah,
Mine.
I don't want that toy unless they have it, in which case would really like my toy back. That's my toy.
Mhm.
It's- exactly. Now, if their trespass means riches for the world, what does that mean?
Salvation.
Mm-hmm.
Salvation for the rest of the world.
Yep, Israel's rejection of the Messiah puts Jesus on the cross, right? Which allows him to take on our sin, which allows him to raise from the grave, which allows him to defeat sin and death,
Mhm.
which allows the gospel to be rich in the whole world.
Mhm.
That's pretty significant. God has used their trespass pretty significantly, right?
Mhm.
So he absolutely allowed them to reject him for a big purpose, right? So their trespass means riches for the world, and their failure means riches for the Gentiles. And so their failure to accept the gospel their rejection of Jesus puts him on the cross. Their failure to accept the gospel means that the gospel goes to the Gentiles too. And so all of these things that God is fulfilling, who knew when God made that promise to Abraham that he would bless the whole earth through the nation of Israel, that much of Israel would be rejecting what God was doing as it was accomplished, that he would be using Israel's sin in a lot of ways to make that happen and to have that come to pass. But he's not saying that Israelites are just high and dry. Because what does he say? How much more then will a full inclusion mean? So what do you think he's saying there?
I don't know, but is he saying that he's going to restore Israel? Like all of it?
At some point, they
I mean, that is
do
the
an about
promise.
face.
At some
Or
point,
is
yes,
it
he is going to restore Israel completely, right? And that is what's coming.
is this saying though the whole nation of Israel?
I don't think he's necessarily talking about the whole nation of Israel here, though he will restore the nation of Israel at some point, right? And
Hmm.
that's coming. Um, I think what he's saying here is if God could do that much to the people of Israel's failure, how much more beautiful is it how much more beautiful is it when even after all of that, he provides some of them salvation?
Mhm.
If he could do this much for his glory with their sin, how much more could he do with their salvation?
Mhm. Mhm.
And I think that does act as this continued call to the Jews to go share still. Yes, they messed up. Yes, some won't ever get it, but some will. And think about what that could do for the kingdom.
Mhm.
If their rejection of God could do this much, man, what could their acceptance of God do? Him being a prime example of that, right? Um, Someone who absolutely rejected the Messiah, who God intervened in his life. I think there's significance to Paul being the author here. Paul is a Jew that rejected the Messiah. Paul is a guy that thought he had it all right. Paul was the guy persecuting Christians, and God showed up in his life and wouldn't be ignored. And then Paul became like the greatest missionary in all of history. and brought the gospel to the Gentiles. Those that had been far off, called the church to unity, and used him mightily. He is the character example of what he's talking about here. He used their sin to do incredible things for his glory, to bring salvation to the whole world. Man, if he could do that with their sin, what could he do with their obedience?
Mhm.
Thoughts on any of that? I love this picture, this part of the picture of God's sovereignty. The way that they're at their messiest, God was using it for a massive purpose. It's very freeing to be like, okay, at no
Yeah.
point do I derail God's plan with my messiness.
Mhm.
But man, can he use my obedience? Right? So I want to walk in obedience, but there's not a thing I can do that could derail the plan of God.
Mhm.
It's pretty cool, pretty significant.
Yeah, these are another set of verses, that I've read for years, but never have unpacked it like this.
Mhm.
Yeah. And it's a sweet moment where all of those things that make you worried God is sadistic when you talk about the sovereignty as you get through this, right? Because where your brain wants to go as you read about God's sovereignty is that he sounds like this kind of like puppeteer that's kind of playing with our lives, right? Is where our brain wants to go in response to that. And then you see this glimpse of where we understand God's why, for why he handled it the way he handled it. And we go, oh, you know better than me. He's not playing with me. He's accomplishing an incredible purpose that I don't know all the ins and outs of yet. He's using those rejections. He's using those salvations. And he's doing the greatest good. Any other thoughts before we work on CMTs? All right, let's do CMTs.
I just said, even at Israel's worst, God was using them to bring salvation to the whole world.
Yeah, I just said God planned that Israel's rejection would mean salvation for the Gentiles of the world. Then Israel becomes jealous as they have a relationship with Him.
Mine is super basic. God works through sin and salvation for His glory.
Mm.
Yeah.
So I've got God's plan is larger and more complex than one I can even imagine. When I think the Jews have been written off because of their disobedience, God shows how much He loves them still.
Mm-hmm.
Mine was just like along the lines of, I didn't write it down because I've been doing things, but that God uses, I put it in term, not the Gentiles, but just that God uses our failures for His salvation. Instead of saying the word trespasses, but basically where we fail,
Mm-hmm.
or where His people fail, I guess I shouldn't say, He's going to use that for His greater good.
Mm-hmm.
That was my biggest takeaway.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
Yeah. I said God used Israel's sin to invite the rest of the world into salvation. If He can do that with their sin, then He can do even more with their salvation when they do become jealous for Him. Good job, ladies. I know it was just a couple verses, but I wanted to let them have their moment because I think that the message of them is really beautiful. And so
Mm-hmm.
glad we spent some time just in them today. I hope you guys have the best day. We're out early today.
Mm-hmm.
So
Mm.
you guys have a good day. We'll see you in the
Blessings.
morning.